Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, welcome back to the Better Sex Podcast. This is Jessa, and thank you. Thank you for tuning in, spending your time with me. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you found me. Feel free to pass the word. Let anybody else know about the show that would benefit from it. I know, every week I've got a huge variety of topics. I know I'm kind of all over the map. And some of these are more useful to you than others. I get that. Not every episode is going to be applicable. Although I do tend to believe that it's worth listening to because you sort of never know when you're going to need this information, right? Something may happen to you or a partner or even just to a friend. You hear some show and it's not relevant to you, but, next week, next year, your friend is going through something and it's like, I've heard about that. I know something about it. There's some way to address it or there's some support. So that's sort of my thinking in offering this variety of topics. Today I am interviewing Erin Underwood, and it's a nice compliment to an episode I did with Sherry Palm, who founded an organization in support of pelvic organ prolapse. So I did a whole show about prolapse, what it is, the various types, how you get it diagnosed, treatment options, and especially the support network that she founded. Well, today, Erin is going to share her personal story around this. I love having the personal stories because I think that is so impactful to hear from people who have struggled and who have, hopefully overcome their struggles, but at least addressed them. And Erin is this person. She has had 4 babies in a short amount of time. After the 4th one had prolapse, among other issues. And this was back in the day before Sherry's organization even existed. It was not easy to come up with information. It was not easy to even get a diagnosis. It was certainly not easy to figure out a way to address and treat it. She kind of had to put a bunch of resources and experts together and then implemented something for herself, which has resulted in complete asymptomology. Is that how I'd say it? She's got no prolapse anymore. Now, that's not the promise for everybody, but she is sharing the various kinds of things that were helpful and could be helpful to somebody who's having this experience. So hope you enjoy it. I hope you, tuck this away in your brain someday. So when some friend is struggling with something that looks like prolapse or feels like prolapse, you'll have something to offer. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So, Erin, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I love when people are willing to come on and share what they've been through personally, because I think that really, it resonates for people. It lets people know there's other people that are struggling with stuff, so.
For sure. Yeah, I think with certain issues, especially more personal, intimate issues, it seems like there's such a shame response that it is almost hard to talk about. And so that's why I get excited about talking. Sometimes I talk about it in appropriate times. But
you talk too much, right? No, I think you're right. I think people feel ashamed. I think they feel isolated. I certainly think they feel alone, as if, this doesn't happen to other people. What's wrong with me? So it's really wonderful that you're going to share. So
yeah, absolutely.
So I guess start off at, kind of the beginning of the story, how the struggles happened for you. What's what's the background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in more like an athletic type. So did gymnastics, did swimming. Like my body was very cooperative. So basically anything I put my mind to or I worked at, I could make happen. So that was my reality coming into motherhood, was like, if I just buckled down and I did the work, my body would respond the way I wanted it to. And so I had 4 full-term births, 6 pregnancies, so 2 ended in miscarriage within 6.5 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So just like we cranked them out.
Yeah.
And so after baby number 4, my body was communicating it had had enough. So I had pelvic organ prolapse, grade 2 rectocele and uterine, which is, we have the 3 holes, and so it was the middle and the back. And then I had a diastasis recti, which is the separation of the abdominal muscles. I had chronic SI joint pain. I mean, like the list went on. And I was completely freaked out because my body was like, I felt broken.
Had you had any of these issues before birth number 4?
No, my body.
Well, okay. So you're thinking, I can crank out babies and just bounce right, snap right back into shape. Okay.
Yeah.
So I interviewed somebody about Prolapse recently. I released that episode because she founded a support organization about it. How did that show up for you? How did you know? Like, what were some of the symptoms or the impacts that you experienced as you were struggling with some of this?
So I felt a lot of heaviness. The way I could describe it was it felt like I had a tampon in me that was falling out. Or when I was sitting, it felt like I was sitting on something hard or like a ball, like a tennis ball.
Wow. Okay, that's really helpful to hear because I can relate to both of those. I haven't sat on a tennis ball, but but I think those are sensations that people could imagine and be like, oh, right. Yeah, I don't have a tampon in. So
yes, exactly. And that chronic feeling of like it was slipping out, but I wasn't wearing a tampon. And then a lot of incontinence. So like not just when I was sneezing, not just when I was jumping, but just if my bladder got too full and I got distracted because I'm doing the mom life thing, all of a sudden I would be like, oh, I'm leaking.
Yeah.
So a lot of leaking there too.
Okay. So what did you do? I mean, I'm imagining, first of all, so you're just saying this is the first time in my life where my body is like, whose body is this? Right. It's not cooperating the way I've always known it to do. So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, it was a emotional response. I think when we're talking about these intimate parts of our bodies, it's different than just, oh, my arm's not working. I'm going to go see a specialist for my arm and we're going to fix my arm. Yeah. There was a lot of shame. There was a lot of fear, a lot of narrative, like I'm broken.
Yeah.
And a lot of the narrative that I had heard around pelvic floor stuff just seemed to reinforce that. Like, of all the things, you just don't want prolapse because that's the end of the world. And then, well, that's what I have. And so,
did you recognize that yourself? Did you know you had prolapse before you ever saw, a gynecologist or whatever?
I knew something was off like immediately after I gave birth. Like I knew. And I was kind of put off a few times by some specialists. Like they were like, no, it's normal. You'll be fine. Like just give it some time. Yeah. And time didn't help. And then I was diagnosed with my prolapses. So when I was diagnosed, I just cried. I was like so discouraged because I just felt broken. And I just remember being like, I don't know what to do. And my OB was like, well, you can live with it as long as you're not in pain. Mm-hmm. Like you can just live with it. It's not going to hurt you.
Right.
It's going to be uncomfortable, but you can just live with it, or you can get surgery. Neither one of those really set right with me.
Those were the 2 options that were presented, right? Live with it or surgery. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Like you're a woman, you've given birth. So like, of course you're not functioning fully well down there. Like what would you expect was the response. And I was like, why are those my only 2 options? Yeah. Like it just, something didn't sit right with me. I was like, if we were so fragile as a species, like we would all be extinct by now. Because like, it just, something about like this idea of like us as women, we have fragile bodies and like, just doing things like childbirth will break you. I just didn't feel right. And so I went on a research binge because that's what I do. And thank God for Google, because I just was like, I will figure this out myself.
Yeah.
And so I researched and I started, and it was this was about 7 years ago now. So there was not even as much information out there then as there is now. Like, I'm grateful that the conversations are starting to happen. There are more tools and options and programs and things that are coming to the surface. But back then it was not as much the case at all. And so I finally stumbled upon a woman who, she was a biomechanist. And so she was really like nerdy and sciencey, but she broke it down and explained it in a way where I was like, there's some hope here. Like, she wasn't like, you're just a woman, you're broken. She was like, started explaining what was going on in my body. And it was more sciencey than it was just like a layman's term, but it was at least something. And so that started me on my journey to starting to be like, I could make a difference. I could see some change. I could rehab this. And I think that belief is one of the most powerful things. Like, there are tons of tools and some are effective, but the belief that there's hope, like, you can't replace that.
So something in her description of what was happening with prolapse let you see, like, wow, this could be reversible or this could be treatable somehow, rehab.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And she got into a little bit about culture and how we are such a sedentary culture that we have higher rates of certain issues than other cultures that aren't sedentary. And so she was getting into more like the science behind that. But to me, I was like, okay, if it's a cultural thing and other cultures don't experience what we experience, then if I shift some of my behavior, then I could get a different outcome.
Right.
So, yeah.
All right. So what did you do?
I know everyone wants to know. What'd you do? I tried a lot of things and a lot of little things helped. So I just tried everything basically. And there were certain things that helped, but a lot of it was, there is a book that I highly recommend. It's called Diastasis Recti, which is by Katie Bowman, but she gets into pelvic organ prolapse as well. Okay. And she talks a lot about pressure systems and inner abdominal pressure and how we can control those inner abdominal pressures. So the idea is we have certain cultural things that we think are normal. So think of like Spanx or sucking in your belly, because culturally we're designed to believe that thinness is attractive and, you know, you want to have less of you to, you know, be of greater value to the world. And so if you picture a balloon and you squeeze the middle of the balloon's going to go up and down.
Yeah, right. It's not like it disappears. It doesn't melt away. It goes somewhere else.
Yeah, there are things inside that container. And so we're the same way with our belly, where there are things inside that container. And I think sometimes we think it just disappears. Like we can suck it in.
We can compress it or something.
Yes. Yeah. But really what we're doing is we're adding that pressure. And then for some women, it can create a lot of downward force onto the pelvic floor. And what can happen then is you're just dealing with that all the time. And so even just a simple practice of relaxing your belly, like it doesn't have to be in front of anyone if you're nervous about the shape or whatever. But one of the practices that I've done is just called belly release. It's just you release all the musculature in your belly and let them relax. And I mean, we can get a little bit more into like some of the science and what have you, but we are really cultured and trained to believe that calories are king. We want to burn calories and more is better. So if I want to have a toned fit belly, if I have it engaged all the time, then that's going to be good because I'm burning more calories and it's engaged and it's on.
Right. But you're saying that's basically creating a squeeze function that is putting pressure on these organs.
Exactly. And then a strong muscle doesn't only have the ability to engage, it also has the ability to release. Yeah. And so if you think of like your fist, if you clench your fist all the time, it's not a very functional hand. Yeah. Because you want to be able to extend it and grab things and do things and move around. And it's the same thing with the belly. If it's always engaged, it's not going to be the most functional as it can be. So that was one thing that I did. Yeah.
That makes sense. Could you feel something change as you were doing these belly releases?
It's really interesting. The belly release, I find a lot of times brings up more of an emotional response than it does immediate physical response. So we are inside the belly. We have the psoas, which is our fight or flight muscle. It's the one that pulls you into the fetal position. And it can hold a lot of trauma and a lot of emotion and energy. And so when we actually allow that to release, we can experience an emotional response.
Oh, wow.
And there's also like a strong cultural thing about the belly. And then if you actually just kind of embrace the shape that your belly is in the state that it's in and allow it just to be, I see a lot of women kind of have to process that emotional response as well, of more like acceptance.
Yeah.
This is where I'm at. I'm not going to try and change it right now. I'm going to be and sit with myself in the shape that I'm in, whatever shape that is.
Right.
And it's almost like a mental challenge more than it is a physical challenge.
It's Jessa here, just taking a quick break. Thanks for listening. Are you interested in being a guest on the show? I'm always looking for people with expertise to share that could enrich other people's sex lives. And I'm also interested in hearing from people who have transformed their own intimate relationship and would want to share their story with my listeners. So if you've got something to contribute to the discussion and want to see about being featured on an upcoming episode, please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, and check out the Be a Guest details. You'll find everything you need there. What else did you do?
Another tip that also helps relieve some of the pressure in the belly is getting the rib cage engaged in the breath. So for many of us, and especially for me, I'm a curvy girl and I own it, but for curvy girls, a lot of times we will gravitate towards underwire bras because they're quote unquote more supportive. But what we're actually doing is we're taking a wire cage basically and strapping down our rib cage.
Okay.
And the ribs are designed to expand and contract. And so when we take that movement away from our body, then we have to rely solely on the belly to breathe.
Which would be pushing down.
Exactly. It's that inner abdominal pressure. It's basically breathing into a balloon over and over and over again, which it's not that the belly shouldn't move at all, but when we take away all rib cage mobility, then we can just add a lot of pressure to the pelvic floor, to the core as well. So healing diastasis, this is really helpful for that as well.
Yeah.
So just one, I ditched the underwire bras. And so I've got bras that will allow me to move.
Right.
And then I practiced using those muscles and getting that rib cage to move because before, like, I didn't even have mobility in my rib cage. Like, I go to take a breath just using my rib cage and I feel like I was suffocating because it was so locked down. So that was another helpful, just daily practice of just the real practical things.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds like retraining too. Like we have habits, not just the clothing, but even just how we're used to moving our body, what we're holding tight and what we're moving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those are really helpful, just practical everyday. Because I'm a new mom with 4 little kids. Like, I didn't have time for, okay, now I'm going to do an hour of rehab every day. Like, it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So, which I did do some rehab, but those were some practical things that I did.
Right. What else did you discover that's helpful with this in terms of healing?
So I did implement a lot of Katie Bowman's work, as far as she talks about a lot of this work in her book. And she has a few exercises that really just help you dial in feeling what's recruiting and what's not, and knowing how to control your inner abdominal pressure, as far as, from when you're talking and coughing to all the way when you're picking up your baby and when you're moving around throughout the day, and how am I bearing down on my pelvic floor, or can I actually recruit the core so that it's supportive? And so I really recommend, it's like $10 on Amazon. So
right.
Who's feeling really stuck, it's really practical and really kind of walks you through it. And using those little adjustments were really powerful. And then for me, I got back into exercise without the athlete mentality. So for me, it was more of a mental shift into, I'm going to take care of myself now and move for the joy of it rather than like an intense training mentality.
Right. With performance and measurement and,
Mm-hmm.
pass or fail, maybe, right? Success
Yes.
or failure. Right.
So like walking is a really powerful exercise because you do a ton of glute and hamstring engagement, which is very supportive to the pelvis. But I had to mentally be okay with walking because I grew up just thinking like, this is like a grandma exercise. Like, this is what you do when you like can't really do anything else. And so it felt like a lower grade exercise. And when I studied a little bit behind it, like the mechanics behind it, I'm like, it's so awesome. It works so many different parts of your body and it works different muscles than running. Right. So it's completely different mechanics. So it's not that one's necessarily better than the other, but if you're only doing running, which I used to be a runner, then you're missing out on some of the things that walking can give you. So being okay mentally with doing things that felt slow or felt more rehabilitative, but being like, no, this is actually really beneficial for my body. And so,
yeah. Well, plus running is a risk factor for prolapse.
It's a high impact.
The force of it, right? The high impact nature of that. So I can see where people might want to. You might want to switch to way more walking anyway to cut down on that impact.
Yeah. So it was basically I retrained my body. So I can now. I've healed. I've gone through this healing journey, and now I can do anything. I can run. I can run down a sand dune. I can jump on a trampoline. Like I can play with my kids. I'm not going to leak. I have. My doctors have checked. I'm completely asymptomatic with my prolapse. So not that everyone's story is that way, and not that, it's guaranteed everyone can heal. But the story that I was told is that it was impossible. Right. And that there was no hope. And for me, I was like, and now I'm in all these different Facebook groups and circles. And so many women have seen a huge impact in healing of their prolapse and diastasis and all of that. And so I think that hope piece is really powerful.
Right. So what about the pelvic floor itself, like something like kegels or, other exercises? Is that part of the healing?
I did do some pelvic floor, like specific exercises. The Kegel is really interesting because a Kegel it depends on what you define a Kegel as. So a lot of people a Kegel will be described as stop your urine flow. Do you feel the muscles that you just engaged? Okay, squeeze those over and over and over and over again. And if you do a little bit of history, the Kegels were invented by a man, Dr. Kegel, who was awesome. He was a good guy. And I don't know if I don't think even he started this, but somewhere in the line of men teaching women how to Kegel, right? Because back in the day, it was mostly male doctors. They would describe it that way of feel your urine flow, stop it, now engage that. Women are wired a little differently down there. And so for men to stop their urine flow, or anyone with male anatomy, they have to use their really deep pelvic floor muscles. And for female anatomy, to stop your urine flow, you're using really superficial muscles. So there's a little bit already in translation that's getting lost. Okay. And so if you're only squeezing those superficial muscles, there's a whole network of muscles that you're kind of missing with practicing of the engagement. So I like to cue, and this is a sex podcast, so we can be,
right. Yes, you can be explicit.
We can talk about anatomy, but basically imagining that you have like a grape at the tip of your vagina and like sucking it up. Yeah. And then slowly releasing it down. So basically maybe count up to the count of 5 and then release to the count of 5. And rather than cueing, stop your urine flow. Yeah, yeah. And also focusing on the release just as much as the engagement, because the strong pelvic floor, because you can have too much tension in those muscles or not have the ability to engage the muscles. There's kind of two sides of the coin when it comes to pelvic floor dysfunction. Yeah. And so, the only way you really know what's going on is if you go to a pelvic floor PT and have them do an internal exam. But you can feel some of us have that ability to engage, and then you go to release and it just feels awkward and stinted and like, wait, how do I do that? And so just bringing that intention of like, can I not only engage the pelvic floor, kind of pull that grape up, but what if I slowly try and release it down with control? That controlled release what do I experience there and what's going on with my pelvic floor there. So that is how I personally have practiced Kegels and how I cue it. And I find them the most helpful.
Yeah. Okay. So that was part of the process you went through in terms of healing all this.
Yeah. Yes. So definitely feeling my pelvis engage, but also the release and being able to control my muscles, not just tighten. So again, it's just like the belly. Like I didn't want to just suck in my belly.
Right.
And you don't want to just try and suck up the pelvic floor. It's like I want it to be able to respond and engage.
Right. Now you mentioned a couple of times sneeze, leaking a little bit with peeing or jumping on a trampoline. Is that a sign of a problem, or is that a sort of a normal type of, I guess I'd have to say, incontinence,
Yeah. Well, normal doesn't necessarily mean healthy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So I would say actually culturally it's very normal. So you see and you hear the jokes and, you hear the commercials and we all giggle, like, oops, need my special pads. But it is a sign that your pelvic floor is experiencing more pressure than it can handle. So it is a sign of it's basically not fully functioning. So it's not like wave the red flag, like you're in massive trouble, this is an emergency. But I do like to talk about it as like, hey, there definitely could be some extra strengthening that could happen so that you don't have to experience that. Because I think when we talk about normal, then we just accept it as women. Like I'm powerless. Again, that narrative.
Yeah, we're back to this idea of this is just the way it is, accept it. To, learn to live with it.
Exactly.
Which you don't have to do.
Yes. So I know a ton of people who have reversed all kinds of incontinence and even fecal incontinence, which again, I just like to throw out there because there's extra shame connected to that.
Yeah.
And it is definitely something that some people experience. And there's so much shame connected to that. And it's just like, no, it's just what I like to say is your body giving you feedback. Your body's communicating to you. It's just telling you what's going on. And you don't have to have a shame response to it. It's just like, okay, now I get to do something with this information.
Yeah. So would you talk just a little bit about, whether people can reach out to you, what you're doing with this work or awareness?
Absolutely.
In the world,
I do in-person classes and I have online experiences. I have little videos and I have a blog and I have some resources on my website. So I love I do some Skype sessions too. So I definitely love working with this group because I can connect really well with understanding the fear and the feelings of maybe hopelessness. So it is definitely something that I get real excited about.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'll put links in the show notes so people have access and can find you. So
that would be awesome. Yeah. Everything is Erin Underwood Movement. So website, social media platforms, it's all there.
It's all there. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing your story, and especially this, I love this message of hope that things can get better.
Well, thank you so much for everything you're doing. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get to know you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.